The radio operator's fingers moved across the Morse key with practiced precision. In a cramped attic room in Richmond Hill in London, each tap sent another carefully crafted lie racing through the ether towards Nazi Germany. The messages bore the authentication codes of Agent Hubert, a trusted German spy who had penetrated the highest levels of Allied command. But the man dictating these reports wasn't German at all, nor did he hold any loyalty to the Nazis. Roman Czerniawski was a Polish patriot who had already survived capture, recruitment by the Abwehr, and a desperate flight to freedom. Now, in the spring of 1944, his fabricated intelligence about phantom American armies massing in southeast England was being read by Adolf Hitler himself. The irony was exquisite. The Führer, studying reports of General Patton's fictional invasion force, had no idea that his most trusted source was a man whose hatred for the Nazi regime burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Roman Czerniawski was a wartime double agent who was nearly lost to history. Fortunately, his story has been preserved so that his bravery may never be forgotten. Roman Garby Czerniawski was born on the 6th of February 1910 in what is today Tomsk in western Ukraine. Back then, the region was part of the crumbling Austro-Hungarian Empire. Roman was ethnically Polish, but his nation as a state had been erased from the map for over a century. When the nation was miraculously resurrected in 1918, young Roman found his calling in its reborn military. For a decade before the Second World War, he served as a captain with the 1st Regiment of Aviation near Warsaw. Standing at an imposing height, he had to fit his lanky frame into aircraft designed for smaller men. His physical presence was matched by his intellect. He was a man who commanded attention in any room he entered. By the late 1930s, he had become the kind of officer Poland desperately needed. Brilliant, dedicated, and uncompromising in his devotion to the motherland. The prestigious Higher War School in Warsaw, Poland's premier military academy, molded him into a first-class general staff officer. Captain Czerniawski was serving in the organization department of the Polish Air Force when war broke out on the 1st of September 1939. German tanks rolled across the border, and within weeks, his country had once again vanished, caught between the Nazi war machine and Stalin's Red Army in a pincer movement that crushed Polish resistance without mercy. Tasked with the impossible mission of organizing air defenses around Lublin using whatever depleted aircraft remained from the devastation in Warsaw, he witnessed firsthand the terrible efficiency of German combined arms tactics. The Luftwaffe had achieved air superiority within days, leaving Polish ground forces exposed to devastating dive bomber attacks. It was a masterclass in modern warfare that left an indelible impression on the young staff officer. As Poland collapsed around him, Czerniawski faced a choice that thousands of his countrymen would confront: accept defeat or continue the fight from exile. For a man who lived and breathed for Poland, there was no choice at all. France offered refuge, but not for long. Between November 1939 and March 1940, Czerniawski honed his intelligence skills at the Paris Military School before taking charge of intelligence for the Polish 1st Division. When the German blitzkrieg shattered France in the summer of 1940, he found himself stranded in occupied territory. The fall of France was for many even more shocking than Poland's rapid defeat. The nation that had boasted the world's largest army after Russia collapsed in just 6 weeks. Standing amid the wreckage of Allied hopes, Czerniawski conceived a bold vision to achieve Allied strategic superiority. If he could create an intelligence network stretching across occupied France, a dense screen of eyes as he described it, he could feed this vital intelligence to London. The Polish command in exile authorized his plan, and Interalli was born. In English, meaning cooperation between the Allies, Interalli was intended as a network of spies across France whose purpose was to collect military intelligence on German troop movements, fortifications, and other strategic targets, and then to pass it on to Britain via clandestine radio and courier routes. To operate covertly, he adopted the identity of Armand Boni, acquiring the real deceased man's birth certificate, clothing, and even his old bicycle. The story goes that he cycled 300 miles all the way to Paris, navigating German checkpoints with nothing but forged documents and nerves of steel. Czerniawski had patriotic fervor in abundance, but he was going to need far more than that to build a spy network from scratch. Fortunately, he had the trained analytical mind of a military staff officer. Czerniawski understood that his thick Polish accent made recruitment difficult among French citizens already suspicious of foreign influence. First and foremost, he needed a recruiter. Fate soon delivered an answer in the form of Mathilde Carré, a well-educated Frenchwoman with the poise and connections he desperately needed. Carré, codenamed La Chatte, or the Cat, became his companion secretary and primary recruiter. Together, they built something remarkable. Carré found willing recruits, and Czerniawski trained them in the fundamentals of espionage, teaching them to observe German organizational insignia and color-coded markings with scientific precision. The network's growth was meteoric. Czerniawski astutely analyzed the stages of French public reaction to Nazi occupation, from initial shock and bewilderment to resignation, then annoyance, and finally a growing hatred that fueled desire for action and resistance. This provided the perfect recruiting environment for his expanding organization. Czerniawski divided his network of over 160 agents into 14 sectors with specialized protocols for safe houses and courier drops, sometimes using a busy language school or public lavatory as letterboxes. He trained agents to read German military markings systematically. A white horse meant infantry, yellow piping could indicate armor. Reports were often hundreds of pages with hand-drawn maps smuggled in film canisters. This provided London with the complete German order of battle in France down to the company level. They identified 22 German divisions in France, using the enemy's own color-coding system for regiments to create detailed intelligence assessments. Beyond troop movements, they gathered data on ammunition dumps, aerodromes, naval installations, and the mysterious new radar sites appearing along the French coast. These intelligence treasures were photographed, hidden on undeveloped film, and smuggled out through an elaborate courier system. Agents learned to cross the demarcation line between occupied and unoccupied France, then slip across the Spanish border to mail their film rolls to British contacts. Polish radio experts, meanwhile, built transmitters that sent regular reports directly across the channel to London. Czerniawski himself made 18 illegal crossings of the demarcation line, each one at significant personal risk. But success bred vulnerability. Czerniawski's focus on aggressive intelligence gathering, leveraging rapidly expanding groups of enthusiastic but amateur patriots, created structural weaknesses. The network grew too fast, without the rigid compartmentalization and deep cover protocols of a mature intelligence service. He was a brilliant analyst and organizer, but not yet a master of counterintelligence. The end of Interalli came with devastating swiftness. In November 1941, an informer betrayed the network to the Germans. Hugo Bleicher, an officer of the Abwehr, began closing the nets with methodical precision. Mathilde La Chatte Carré was arrested first. The woman who had been Czerniawski's trusted deputy and lover faced a terrible choice in her Gestapo cell. Bleicher, speaking fluent French and displaying an intimate knowledge of Interalli operations, made the stakes crystal clear: cooperate or be executed. Faced with torture and certain death, she broke. The decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life was made in a moment of terror. She agreed to work for the Germans. In exchange for her life, she received German gold and Bleicher's protection. Some whispered that she had become his mistress, though the truth of their relationship remains murky. What was certain was her systematic betrayal of dozens of former comrades. She provided Bleicher with names, addresses, meeting places, and operational details that allowed the Abwehr to roll up Interalli with devastating efficiency. The network's security had always been its weakness. Unlike professional intelligence services with their rigid compartmentalization, Interalli operated more like an extended family. Agents knew each other, socialized together, and shared operational details that should have been kept strictly separate. When Carré began talking, she was threatening the exposure of virtually the entire organization. On the night of the 17th of November 1941, they came for Czerniawski. The arrest was swift and professional. No dramatic chase or shootout, just a knock on the door and the cold reality of handcuffs. With its leadership captured and its secrets exposed, the Interalli network was shattered. Within weeks, over 60 agents found themselves in German custody, facing interrogation and likely execution. The spymaster who had built France's most effective resistance organization found himself in a Gestapo cell, awaiting what seemed certain death. In those dark hours, Czerniawski must have reflected on the cruel irony, betrayed not by German counterintelligence brilliance, but by the weakness of someone he had trusted with his life. But Czerniawski had one saving grace. He had not fallen into the hands of Heinrich Himmler's brutal SS. He was a captive of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, an organization whose chief, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, was secretly working against the Nazi regime. This distinction would save his life and change the course of the war. For 8 months, Czerniawski sat rotting in Fresnes prison, fully expecting to face a firing squad. He endured 6 weeks of brutal interrogation, refusing to betray his agents. Once it became clear to the Abwehr that Czerniawski would never crack, they chose a different tack. The Abwehr were desperately short of qualified intelligence agents, and here was a man who had built one of the most effective spy networks in occupied Europe. Perhaps he could do the same for them. The offer came from Colonel Joachim Rohleder, an Abwehr officer who recognized Czerniawski's abilities and respected his unwavering loyalty to his network. The deal that was offered presented far more to Czerniawski than he ever could have hoped for. So long as he agreed to work for Germany, he would walk free. More importantly, his captured Interalli comrades would be treated as prisoners of war rather than executed as spies. Czerniawski's initial refusal of the deal gave way once he learned of the German armies sweeping toward Moscow and Stalingrad in the autumn of 1941. Telling his captors that he now believed Poland's destiny lay in German hands, he agreed to serve the Reich. The Germans were convinced of his sincerity, but taking no chances, they kept his mother, brother, and other captured agents as hostages. A signed agreement made it clear. One act of betrayal would mean their execution. What the Germans didn't know was that from the very moment he signed their agreement, Czerniawski had betrayal in mind. His apparent conversion was a masterpiece of deception, born from a Polish patriot's desperate calculation that he could serve his country better as a German spy than as a dead martyr. In July of 1942, the Abwehr staged an elaborate escape for their new agent. Hugo Bleicher, the man who had arrested him, was ordered to allow Czerniawski to flee during a prisoner transfer. Czerniawski made his way across Europe to Madrid, where the Abwehr completed his transformation from captured resistance leader to active German agent. They provided training in codes and tradecraft, gave him 2 radio crystals hidden in his shoe heels, a detailed questionnaire about British military capabilities, money, and a cyanide capsule to be used should he be captured. In January 1943, Agent Hubert, as he was known to the Germans, boarded a flight to London with the help of the French resistance. To them, he was an escaped prisoner of war who hoped to head west to continue his fight against the Nazis. The reality of the situation was far more nuanced than that. When Czerniawski arrived in London, he was a very nervous man indeed. He presented himself to British intelligence with an offer to work for the Allies, but said nothing about his German recruitment. Given the hostages left behind and his uncertainty about Abwehr penetration of Polish headquarters in London, his silence was understandable. But it created a crisis of trust among Polish officers. Some defended him as trustworthy, while others questioned his loyalty. British intelligence was also naturally suspicious, unable to completely rule out that Czerniawski might be a triple agent. After weeks of interrogation, Czerniawski came clean, presenting his handlers with a 64-page typed confession titled The Great Game. In it, he revealed his mission for Germany: to report on British aircraft production, gather high-level political intelligence, and even foment discontent among Polish forces in Britain. He insisted, however, that his true intention was always to serve as a double agent, working to destroy the Nazi regime from within. MI5 remained suspicious, yet optimistic. Thanks to codebreakers at Bletchley Park reading German Enigma traffic, they already knew about Agent Hubert. They still feared Czerniawski might be a sophisticated triple agent whose reports would need to be interpreted in reverse to find the truth. As MI5 weighed their options, Czerniawski did something that had the unintended consequence of solidifying trust with British intelligence. A fervent anti-communist, Czerniawski learned that a senior Polish Air Force general had attended a reception at the Soviet embassy in London. In response, he authored and distributed a pamphlet denouncing the general's actions as a betrayal. The Polish authorities had no choice but to arrest him for gross insubordination. Paradoxically, this crisis sealed his value. The court-martial was something the Germans would never have ordered or predicted. It was authentically Czerniawski. His principled, seemingly self-destructive act proved to MI5 that his political convictions were genuine and that he wasn't following a German script. And so the faction within MI5 arguing in his favor won the debate. He was officially brought into the double-cross system, but kept on a tight leash. No longer permitted to operate his own radio transmitter, he was initially used only for passing low-grade intelligence. He was given a new code name that perfectly captured MI5's view of their conflicted asset: Agent Brutus. As 1944 dawned, the Allies faced their greatest challenge of the war, landing on Hitler's fortress Europe. Operation Overlord would succeed or fail based on achieving tactical surprise against the formidable Atlantic Wall. This was a network of bunkers, gun emplacements, and obstacles stretching from Norway to the Spanish border. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had spent months strengthening these defenses, placing millions of mines and obstacles along the beaches. The Germans had 50 divisions in France, including 10 panzer divisions capable of crushing any invasion force if they could concentrate at the landing point. This gave birth to Operation Fortitude, the most complex deception plan in military history. The concept was enormous in its scope. Convince the German High Command that the main Allied invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais. This was, after all, the shortest sea crossing and most logical target. The real landings along the Normandy beaches would appear as merely a diversionary attack. To achieve this monumental deception, the Allies created an entire Phantom Army, the first US Army Group, or FUSAG, supposedly commanded by General George Patton and based in southeast England. This ghost force was brought to life through an orchestra of deception. Thousands of inflatable rubber tanks and dummy landing craft scattered across Kent and Essex. Along with it went convincing fake military radio traffic broadcasts and carefully constructed but empty military encampments visible to German reconnaissance flights. The deception extended far beyond just props. Real units were repositioned to support the illusion, while double agents fed carefully crafted and choreographed intelligence to German handlers. The plan required perfect coordination between multiple Allied intelligence services, with each piece of disinformation designed to reinforce the others in German minds. By December of 1943, the 20 Committee decided Brutus was ready for the main event. His credibility with German handlers remained remarkably high, so much so that the Abwehr believed he was attached to Eisenhower's own staff. This perceived access to the highest levels of Allied planning made his reports incredibly valuable to German intelligence analysts desperate for accurate information about invasion preparations. From his attic in Richmond Hill, working with a British radio operator codenamed Chopin, Brutus began transmitting the lies that would set the course of history. The setup was as ingenious as it was dangerous. He maintained complete control over message content, writing in his own distinctive style, while Chopin handled the actual radio transmission. This arrangement allowed British intelligence to monitor every communication while preserving Brutus's credibility with his German contacts. Brutus did not send his reports in isolation. They were carefully coordinated with other double agents, most notably Juan Pujol Garcia, who was Agent Garbo, who had created a vast network of 27 fictitious sub-agents across Britain. While Garbo provided breadth through his phantom network, Brutus provided the sharp, seemingly authentic observations of a military insider watching the build-up. The scale of coordination was breathtaking. Various other double agents were also in on the act, from Serbian playboy Duško Popov, Arthur Owens, who was the first German agent captured and turned, to Peruvian socialite Elvira Shudwa and Russian-born Frenchwoman Natalie Sergeyev. In March of 1944, Brutus reported false preparations for an Allied attack on Norway from Scotland, reinforcing the separate Fortitude North deception. This phantom threat tied up an entire German army in Scandinavia, 27 divisions that could have been rushed to Normandy. His fabricated Scottish tour provided the Abwehr with detailed intelligence about the fictitious Fourth Army, supposedly massing in Edinburgh under the command of General Andrew Thorne. The psychological warfare was exquisite. Brutus confirmed reports from other agents about Soviet naval and military missions in Edinburgh, implying joint Allied Russian operations against Scandinavia. This fed German paranoia about a two-front assault and reinforced Hitler's obsession with defending Norway. On the 9th of May 1944, Brutus reported sighting the 4th US Armored Division in Bury St. Edmunds, part of the Phantom Fusag force supposedly massing for the Calais assault. These units were real, but their movements had been choreographed to support the deception. On the 25th of May, he placed the 11th British Armoured Division in Surrey, far from the actual Normandy preparations taking place in southern England. Each transmission added another brushstroke to the masterpiece of deception. By D-Day, Brutus had provided the Germans with what appeared to be a complete picture of Patton's fictional army group, including detailed order of battle information that mixed real units with completely imaginary formations. The Germans had been thoroughly tricked into believing their false agents. Throughout 1943, these men and women had provided accurate intelligence about real Allied operations in the Mediterranean, including the invasions of Sicily and Italy. This established credibility made their D-Day deceptions devastatingly effective. German intelligence had no reason to doubt them. The success was total. The German High Command, including Hitler himself, swallowed the bait completely. The echo chamber of cross-confirmed lies by multiple double agents paralyzed German reserves. Even after Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on the 6th of June 1944, they remained convinced this was only a feint. For crucial weeks, Germany held back the powerful 15th Army in Pas-de-Calais, including elite panzer divisions equipped with the formidable Tiger tanks that could have devastated the Normandy beachhead. The numbers tell the story of the deception's impact. The Germans had stationed their strongest forces exactly where the Allies wanted them, away from Normandy. Of the 10 panzer divisions in France, only one was positioned to immediately counter-attack the real landings. The 15th Army, with over 200,000 men, remained in the Pas-de-Calais area for weeks after D-Day, waiting for Patton's phantom invasion that would never come. This strategic paralysis gave the Allies the time they desperately needed to consolidate their fragile beachhead. Without the deception, German reserves would have rushed to Normandy within hours of the landing, potentially crushing the invasion before it could gain momentum. The lies told by Brutus and his fellow double agents undoubtedly contributed to ensuring that Operation Overlord would succeed in opening the long-awaited Second Front in Europe. For Roman Czerniawski, Allied victory bore bitter fruit. His beloved Poland fell under Soviet domination, a regime he loathed just as much as the Nazis. Return to a hero's welcome was impossible. The communist government would have imprisoned or executed him as a Western spy. And so he chose exile in the country he had served so faithfully. Roman Czerniawski faded into quiet obscurity in West London, taking up the modest trade of printing. His neighbours knew nothing of his wartime exploits. To them, he was simply a charming East European gentleman with an affinity for cats. His wartime service hadn't gone entirely unrecognised. In 1941, the Polish government in exile awarded him Poland's highest military decoration. After the war, he was secretly appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire for his service to the Allied cause. Eventually, in 1961, and with War Office permission, he published The Big Network, detailing his creation of Interalli. But the book remained silent about his crucial role as Agent Brutus. This was a secret still too dangerous to tell. The first public disclosure of Czerniawski's role as Brutus only came much later, in 1972, when J.C. Masterman's book, The Double Cross System, was published. Czerniawski was named as one of the double agents. His full story would emerge over the decades that followed. Roman Czerniawski died in London on the 26th of April 1985, aged 75. He was buried among fellow Polish airmen in Newark-on-Trent, his heroic contributions to Allied victory largely forgotten by the public. The quiet anonymity of his final years was the tragic consequence of his political reality. Caught between Western secrecy and Eastern hostility, he was a silent hero whose full story couldn't be told in his lifetime. In the final accounting, Roman Czerniawski stands as one of the most effective agents of the entire double-cross system. His unique background as a professionally trained Polish staff officer, combined with the credible cover story his capture provided, allowed him to play a role few others could have managed. The radio in that Richmond Hill attic fell silent long ago, but its final message still echoes through history. In the end, the Polish patriot who began the war building networks to fight the Nazis ended it by feeding them the lies that sealed their doom.